So, Ray, thanks so much for agreeing to talk to me. I'd really like to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself.
Born in Swindon 70 years ago or so. I was educated in Swindon at the same school as Dick Mattick.
Right.
Dick was a few years older than me, obviously, but we both went to Park Grammar School in the 60s. From there, I went to no, it wasn't Milton Keynes, it was North Buckinghamshire College of Education, which later became Milton Keynes College, which was actually situated in Bletchley Park, which, of course, in those days, nobody knew its importance during the war. Qualified as a teacher in 1972, and I started teaching in the Midlands in Cannock in Staffordshire. Moved back to Swindon in 75, and from then on gradually sort of drifted towards the top, I suppose. Became a head in 1991 of South Marston, which had 80 kids at the time. In 2000, I was appointed head of Lethbridge, which was amalgamated between the junior school and the infant school, which had 500 kids in it, which was interesting. At the time, it was the largest primary school in Swindon. It's since been superseded. But and I spent the last 12 years of my career there very happily, most of the time. I'm been married to Anne for 40 years come August. And we have two children, Simon and Philippa, aged 37 and 35 respectively.
Brilliant.
And that's about it, really. I mean, I don't know how much you want, but that's a brief life story.
Well, it gives us a good idea about, where you come from and what you're doing. I hadn't realised that you'd spent most of your time in Swindon, so it's interesting. You only went away for the college then?
Well, I did, and I couldn't get a job in Swindon because I could be cynical and say in the early 70s, if you want to get a job in Swindon, you had to be Welsh. There were so many Welsh teachers here, but I worked in Cannock for 3 years. It just, for one reason and another, didn't work out. It was very difficult in those days to get a mortgage to buy a house because wages were not good. And eventually I came back to live in Swindon. And it took me quite a few years to build enough money to get a mortgage, to get a house. Because it was the era of you went cap in hand to the manager of the building society and practically grovelled for a mortgage, which I think is the same thing nowadays, to be honest. It's gone full circle.
Yes, indeed. But I assume then, if having spent so much time here in Swindon, this is why you also have the travel bug, I believe.
Well, I think it's so much as for a long time we didn't have a chance to travel. We didn't have the money. When I retired 9 years ago, it was an opportunity to travel a bit more. That particular year, a good friend of ours had breast cancer, and my wife and I sort of suddenly just looked at each other and said, you know what, we need to get and travel. And we did. We've been to most parts of the world over the last 9 years, and obviously the last 18 months have meant that we haven't been able to travel, but it's been fantastic, and we hope to get to a few more places yet. I don't think it's driven by just being in Swindon, but just a desire to be able to get about the place. And I think our generation's been particularly lucky in the sense that I wouldn't describe us as being particularly rich, but we've been able to travel really well for the last 10 or 15 years.
Indeed. So with all that going on in your life, I have to ask you, what drew you to Rotary? What attracted you?
Well, as I began winding down to retire, I became part of Mike Welsh's recruitment scheme for ex-head teachers. and Mike invited me along a few weeks before I actually retired. And it worked out really well for me because I honestly would not have had the time to do it while I was working. I just couldn't have devoted the time to it. And I take my hat off to those people who do work and juggle it around. But it was very nice because having worked in an organisation, particularly for the last 12 years, which had 500 children, 70 staff, 300 odd parents, it was, I went to work every day with a lot of people around and a lot of interactions. And I think one of the issues about stopping working is that you stop having those interactions. And it was good for me to join another club, if you like, another social organisation. Obviously, the club was a bit bigger in those days. There were about 33 members when I joined. But it came along at the right time for me, along with one or two other things. So that was my route into Rotary.
Thanks. And did anything happen in those first few years that you remember that were very important to you?
Well, in addition to traveling quite a bit, a lot of people have different views on retirement. I do know people who just can't stop working, who just need to work. Quite frankly, I was glad to walk out the door. I'd had 40 years of teaching, 20 years in education management. That was quite pressured at times, as you can appreciate, because virtually all of those 20 years were a time of huge educational change. I mean, when I started teaching in 1972, you kind of worked out what you were going to do during assembly in the morning, and you went home at 3:30. That was the way it was in those days, a lot different. And of course, nowadays, teachers have, I think, to be honest, like a lot of people, it's not just teachers, but a lot of professions are quite frankly overworked, and the expectations on them are almost impossible in some cases. So I was quite happy to walk out the door. I had no plans, but things turned up for me, which was quite nice, like Rotary. I did carry on doing some work in schools for a while, which I thoroughly enjoyed because it was just working with children in the classroom with no managerial pressures upon me. So I could just enjoy working with the kids. And that was nice because it gave me a kind of phased warm down, if you like, from 40 years. I finished that when I was 65 because my hearing was not so good and neither were my knees. So I couldn't hear what the kids were saying. I couldn't bend down enough to hear them. But I did one or two other things as well. In addition to that, I've been a trustee of the White Horse Care Trust for the last 10 years. That's an organisation which you may know, which looks after people with learning difficulties, sometimes in residential homes, sometimes in supported living. And currently, for the last 2 years, I've been chair of that organisation. So last year was quite interesting because I was president of Rotary and chair of the White Horse Care Trust, and I've got rid of one of those now. But it's been, I've enjoyed it. It's good, and I think the old adage about people not having time in retirement, it is interesting to juggle keeping yourself occupied with the ability to sort of make it so that you can sit down and do nothing for a day. And that seems to me the sort of balance of it all.
Perfect. Yes. So you've just stepped down, of course, as the president. So let's have a look at your year. What did you find were your challenges? Because it was a year like no other. There was no preparation for the pandemic and the effect on meetings. So what would you say were your main challenges?
Well, I can remember doing the training. I went up with Debbie Vincent back in March of last year to a hotel in Cheltenham, and we did one of our days training to become a worthy president, and that was quite interesting. It was nice to sort of meet other people, and then literally a few days later we got locked down, the first lockdown. Obviously I had lots of things that I wanted to do during the year that were the usual things, like I wanted to do a poetry session as well. Actually, that was one of the things I wanted to do. I toyed with the idea of doing a kind of sporting dinner type thing, or the usual kind of Rotary events. And of course, it very quickly became obvious that they were not going to happen. There were a few challenges when I took over. I think that there were some parts of our organisation which felt that they could find me a bit of an easy touch, I think it's fair to say. And that was challenging. I remember Mike Dunn saying to me that, I would want to resign quite a few times during the year. And certainly for the first 2 or 3 months, I just wanted to pack in once or twice. But I think once I got over that and we got into a routine, and I think it's fairly obvious that what we needed to try and do is keep the club together. And that was the challenge of the year, in addition to try and raise some money, which we did. And I think when I look back upon it, relatively pleased with the way it went under the circumstances. There wasn't a lot else we could do, given the fact that we were limited to Zoom and we were limited with the amounts of things that we could physically do, especially for the fact that we now only have effectively 15 active members in our section of the club. The fact that we're still meeting, that we're still working, that we've not gone by the wayside as some clubs have, I think was a pretty much a success in many respects.
Yeah. Well, certainly for me, I think one of your greatest achievements has been keeping the club together and, making the meetings every week something that you didn't want to miss. So from that point of view, what else did you achieve, do you think? What other achievements? What were the highlights for you in the year?
Well, I to be honest, I thought the cafe weekend was brilliant. I really did. It was a good idea from Neil, but I would like to give myself a little bit of credit that he phoned me up and I said yes straight away. And we pushed it through. We probably steamrolled a few ideas together, but I think sometimes you have to go with something. And I thought that worked exceptionally well. It was, I think, important in many respects that we did it ourselves. I wasn't against working with other clubs, but I think it was important that we actually controlled it and did it ourselves. And I think it was great for us as a club to achieve that. It was nice that we had members of the satellite club working in with us as well. That was great. I think there were some individual achievements. The President's Challenge, I thought Pam did exceptionally well with that. And earlier in the year, Mike Dunn did his run. The computers, which Gary actually mentioned in council last night, 140 computers, so laptops collected, which I think is great. So I think from that point of view, we did manage to keep things going. We also had the presents for the harbour project at Christmas. So we managed to keep things doing. We managed to raise reasonable amounts for my major charity, which was Brighter Futures. But I think in the main, the thing I was most proud of was coming back to keeping the meetings going. I was quite proud of doing so many President's Matters as well, which I managed by hook or by crook. It was interesting. Peter last night was saying that he wanted to split it amongst others, which I intended to do at the start of the year. And in fact, I kept forgetting to talk to people about it and getting to Thursday and thinking, I better do it myself. And I kind of went through the year forgetting to tell people, could you do that in 3 weeks' time? So most of them were done by fear more than anything else. And I came a little challenge in the end that I wanted to produce something every Friday. And I think I did.
Yes. And I think it was one of the more popular items on, people would go, if they didn't look at anything else, they looked at what you had to say each week. So we were just saying about your achievements and the highlights for you. And the Friday update message was one that you set yourself as a challenge. So do you want to say something about that?
Well, it's interesting. I quite enjoy writing, but somebody's got to almost force me into writing something. And it was quite interesting, the challenge of what to do each week. There was something slightly different, and I tried wherever possible to link it back into the thought for the week as well. I quite enjoy doing a thought for the week too.
Yes.
I think my favourite one of the year was, if it doesn't matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes worrying about it. And I did try to encourage some of our members to remember that, including me.
Yeah, that's good. It worked, I think worked very well. And it was nice to have the continuity of it. So thank you. You did actually at the beginning, didn't you? You had a couple of ones. I think your committee chairs did the first one for
Yeah.
month. Again, once a week is quite a big commitment, especially if there's only 15.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
42 songs. Well done. And can you think really what's given you the most pleasure as a president? Well, what's the one outstanding thing that you would say, I'm glad I did that because?
Well, I think the cafe weekend took a bit of organising, but and we did some hard work with that, because Neil and myself especially, one or both of us were up there opening up at 8 o'clock or closing at 5 o'clock, buying the stuff, making sure that people were on time, etc. But the beauty of that was it was such a win-win on every level. The parish council did well out of it. I think we did well out of it in terms of publicity, but also in terms of feeling together and camaraderie of the club, and an achievement. Brighter Futures made £3,000 out of it. And the thing was, it was really nice talking to people up there, the people of Old Town. I was conscious of the fact that there'd been negative publicity beforehand. And I really chose Brighter Futures, partly because it was obviously one of my charities, but also that you couldn't really argue against it. So I wanted it to sort of damp down any arguments against us being there. But people were fantastic. It was really nice. It was a real pleasure to work there.
Yes. Well, I would add to that too, from my point of view, was meeting satellite club members, because they were
absolutely. Yeah.
Actually working together as one big team, which was super. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen to Rotary now as we go forward into this new normal?
Do you mean us or Rotary in general?
Well, us, but generally as well. Let's see, what do you think overall Rotary is going to be doing now? Because it's such big changes, but also what do you think, how will you think we ought to dovetail into that?
I think Rotary has, and to a degree has always had, an image issue. Sometimes I want to get rid of the word Rotary. It conjures up a group of old men meeting in a room at lunchtime, and or in the morning, and when you look at it, that's almost what we are, with a few female exceptions, most of whom are older anyway. That's the issue. It's trying to get younger people involved. I think the balance between trying to keep the people who want to meet every week and say have a breakfast or a meal satisfied, with the balance of others who just want to meet occasionally and raise money, etc. And I'm not sure how you resolve that one. I've kind of got a foot in both camps, if you like. I know I've had something to do with Adam Wainwright, who is the president of Phoenix, and they're taking a completely different view of things. I think they're only going to meet a couple of times a month, in different ways. And I think that shows the way Rotary's got to go. On a personal level, I think Rotary is too involved with procedures. I realise there's got to be a structure with things, but there are too many procedures and rules, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and this is the way we do it, and so on. I think we've got to redefine things and say, what do we actually want to do? And for me, the key things about Rotary are that we have a good time meeting together. That's got to be the basis of it, because I think that's probably what Paul Harris and his mates started off doing. They probably enjoyed their meetings on whenever it was in 1920 or whatever it was. And the actual act of then using those meetings for good is still got to be a prime mover. But I still think you can't lose that camaraderie of meeting together and coming up with things to do. So I think Rotary's got to look outside itself a little bit more, rather than be, I think sometimes it gets a bit introspective. Haven't really answered your question there, I know, but and as far as our club is concerned, I think there's some challenging decisions ahead. I think that's fair enough, and I'm not sure at the moment how we resolve those. And in many respects, I'm glad that it's not me that's got to lead the way to resolve those issues. There are benefits, as you know, in meeting through Zoom, and I think that's still got to be a part of it. But similarly, you can't beat human interaction and meeting people and seeing people. So if we're going to meet 4 times a month, I probably think that maybe we could retain one of those as being a Zoom meeting. But I'd still like to have physical meetings.
I think the Zoom meetings would work very well. We'd continue to get very good speakers, because we can have people from, well, literally from around the world if we want, because they know that they're not committed to travelling in at 6:30 in the morning to have breakfast in Old Town. But I think Wootton Bassett is also doing the same. Royal Wootton Bassett are only having 1 meeting a month for speaker meeting, and I think they do other social activities. So I think everybody's thinking about different ways and how they will work for them.
I think in some respects, we have to ease our way towards it and see what works for us. I would be unsure about saying this is the way we go. And let's do it. Let's try it this way for a period of time. Let's see how it goes and review things and see what happens. I think the other thing with us is we hopefully, once we come out of lockdown, and that does look as though within the next few weeks we can get back to meeting. I think it'll be nice to see if we can get a few members extra, get ourselves up to more members.
Yes, by making it probably easier to join. And less, they're committed to having to come every week, but doing it a different way. Yeah, lovely. Okay, well, thanks very much. I mean, you've got a lot of spare time on your hands now. Any immediate plans?
Well, without being able to travel at the moment, we're restricted to staying in this country. Not that that's a bad thing, but when you look at things, it's quite expensive here, actually, isn't it? Stopping here, right, as opposed to going abroad. Let me see. Next week, we're off. We've got tickets for the golf, the Open in Sandwich next Thursday. So we've booked 4 days away. We're going down on Thursday. No, we're going down Thursday. We got tickets for Friday, which we had last year, and they were pushed ahead. Other than that, we've not got a lot booked. We've got a couple of cruises actually after Christmas, but I'm not sure whether they're going to happen yet. We've got one booked for Australia and New Zealand in January, but I think that's going to have to go. In the sense that I see today that Australia has just announced that it won't be holding the Australian Grand Prix in November. So that's quite a lot ahead, isn't it, when you think about it? So if they're thinking no in November, I'm not sure that come January they're going to be happy about people flying in to go on a cruise. So we'll see from that point of view. But we try to get out and about a bit. Anne's, my wife, has now stopped working full time, part time for Brighter Futures. So she's we're relatively free all the time. Hopefully,
something will come up. So this is perfect. Then you're stuck here at home at the moment. So I'm going to ask you the famous dinner party story. Really, here. You had the opportunity to invite people alive or dead up to, I think, 6 people around the table with you, but you could have an extra one if you thought of it. Who would you invite to dinner and why?
Now, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I thought about this, and I tried to put a bit of rationale to this and thought, well, if it's going to be, it's no use inviting Napoleon and Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe, because who knows what's going to happen. So I tried to put a bit of sense into it. I decided that the theme for my dinner would be a sporting one, because I like sport. So I have invited people from different sports, and they're all still alive. And I think that they would provide some relatively stimulating conversation, but also insights into top level sport today, as well as what we can do to encourage more people to take up sport. Because one of the crying shames in this country is schools are just not equipped for sport. Certainly primary schools are not equipped for sport. And yet, surely that's one of the ways in which we can improve our health and improve mental health as well. So my first guest is Gareth Southgate, not just because he's the England football manager and probably the most successful one since Alf Ramsey, but because he is clearly an intelligent and thoughtful man. You've only got to listen to him and see the way that he talks about things and the way he manages people, that he would be an interesting and thoughtful guest. So he's football. Now, I thought about a cricketer. There are obviously lots of cricketers, but my choice, and you'll be pleased with this, because I've tried to put a male-female balance in here as well. So my second guest is Issa Guha, who was an England female international. She packed it about 8 or 9 years ago. She now commentates for Sky Sports, but she is also an extremely literate and passionate advocate for sports. And she's, I think, recently got an MBE for a scheme which she is running to encourage Black children to play cricket. When you listen to her, she comes over as extremely eloquent, passionate, and I think she would be a good guest. Rugby, well, I've invited the most successful England manager of all time, Clive Woodward. Again, a man who thinks, like Gareth Southgate, carefully about things. And I'm sure he would be an interesting and thoughtful guest. As far as tennis is concerned, again, I tried to pick somebody who I thought would be interesting, but have a knowledge of the past in terms of tennis, but also current sports as well. So I've invited Sue Barker. Now, you'd be aware that Sue Barker actually has been running Equestrian Sport for a long time, but also she does the Wimbledon commentaries and so on. And she does come over as being an intelligent, thoughtful person about her sport and other sports as well. I wanted then to have perhaps a sort of wider perspective on things. I'm just thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hang on. All right, here we are now. My list. The next person, it's interesting. I saw this guy on the television the other day talking about cycling, and it's Chris Boardman. I'm not sure if he isn't Sir Chris Boardman, but he, again, comes over as being a thoughtful, intelligent guy, and he is shortly to take over as chair of Sport England. So I thought it would be interesting to hear his perspective on cycling as an elite sport, but also sport in general. And finally, I would like to invite Princess Anne, simply because she again had participated at the highest level, but also because, as far as I'm aware, she's still a member of the International Olympic Committee. So she's got a view on worldwide sport. I think also if you get a few drinks into her, she'd probably be a good laugh as well. If you want one other guest, I did have another one. And again, on the same basis that I chose the others, I thought I'd include golf. And I've invited Paul McGinley, who was the Ryder Cup captain 2 or 3 years ago. Again, a guy who, like Gareth Southgate and Clive Woodward, managed his team very eloquently and very ably. And I think he would be an interesting guy to talk to. So I think they would be really interesting guests to talk to in terms of sport.
I think it'll be amazing. You'll have to get them to discuss the VAR rule then as well.
Well, there's nothing to discuss about it. It needs to go.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with me and for talking to me. Really, really appreciate it. I want to say a special congratulations to you for your year. I thought you an excellent president in leading us through some of the most difficult times and dealing with some of the most difficult members. And although you alluded at the beginning, I would say that probably Melody and I were quite challenging as well. So thank you very much for your year, and thank you for talking to me again.
Thanks indeed, Charlotte. Thank you.